For 4 years, she had carried a secret that could end careers, fracture alliances, and rewrite the official record of a war that, on paper, had never happened. She had told no one. Not her mother, not her old roommate from the academy, not the man she had almost married before everything changed. The secret had a shape, a weight, and a single physical expression. One gesture she had sworn, under oath, in a windowless room with no recording devices, never to use again. And then, on the 3rd floor of the Pentagon, without thinking, without meaning to, Captain Lauren Mitchell raised her hand and made that exact gesture. The man across the desk went white as a sheet. Captain Lauren Mitchell straightened her service jacket for the 3rd time in as many minutes and checked her reflection in the polished brass nameplate beside the door. Room 3 times 10 to the power of -880. Office of the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence, Lt. Gen. Harlan Reeves. She had walked the long curve of the Pentagon's E-ring dozens of times over the course of her career, past the framed portraits of secretaries and chiefs of staff, past the gleaming trophy cases of regimental history, but never with this particular knot tightening in her stomach. General Harlan Reeves was something close to a legend in Army intelligence circles, and not entirely the comfortable kind. A veteran of the First Gulf War who had risen from an infantry private to one of the most powerful intelligence officers in the United States military, Reeves was famous, some said infamous, for a peculiar interviewing style. Officers being considered for sensitive assignments were not handed a list of questions. They were handed a conversation, long and meandering and deceptively casual, the kind of conversation that always seemed to end with the officer having revealed far more about themselves than they had intended. Before we continue, please comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the She Force Tales channel. He's not evaluating your resume. Her mentor, Colonel Diane Park, had told her the week before, over coffee in the Pentagon's basement concourse. He's evaluating you. Don't perform for him. He'll smell it in about 90 seconds, and then the rest of the interview is just him watching you squirm. Lauren had laughed it off at the time. She wasn't laughing now. She knocked twice. The sound was sharp, louder than she intended, and it seemed to hang in the quiet hallway for a long moment before a voice answered. "Enter," came the reply, low, unhurried. The voice of a man who had given orders under artillery fire and in boardrooms with equal ease. The office was everything Lauren had imagined and somehow still managed to surprise her. The walls were lined with photographs, Reeves shaking hands with 3 different presidents, Reeves standing beside foreign ministers and 4-star generals on tarmacs from Seoul to Riyadh, framed citations and campaign ribbons arranged with the precision of a man who never threw anything away. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface bare except for a single manila folder, a chipped ceramic coffee mug, and a small American flag mounted on a wooden stand. Behind the desk sat General Reeves himself. He was a man in his early 60s, his hair cut close and gone entirely to steel gray, his face weathered into the kind of permanent squint that came from decades of desert sun and worse stress. His eyes moved over Lauren the instant she stepped through the door, cataloging her posture, the set of her jaw, the precise crease of her uniform, before she had even fully entered the room. "Captain Mitchell," he said, without looking up from the folder in front of him. "Annapolis, top of your class. 2 combat deployments, Iraq, then Afghanistan." He turned a page, and his eyebrows lifted fractionally. And then, an 8-month gap. Location, classified. Assignment, classified. He finally raised his eyes to meet hers, and there was something sharp and assessing in them, like a man checking the edge of a blade. "Interesting file, Captain. Sit down." Lauren lowered herself into the leather chair across from his desk, keeping her spine straight despite the chair's evident eagerness to swallow anyone who relaxed into it. Reeves continued paging through her file at his own deliberate pace, occasionally making a small sound. Approval, curiosity, she couldn't tell which, and that uncertainty was, she suspected, entirely the point. The silence stretched. Somewhere beyond the thick walls, the low constant hum of the Pentagon's endless activity continued. Distant footsteps, the muffled ring of phones, the whir of climate control fighting a losing battle against the August heat outside. "Tell me something, Captain," Reeves said at last, closing the folder with a soft snap that seemed to echo in the quiet room. What separates a good intelligence officer from a great one? Lauren had prepared for a question like this. Every officer who walked into this office had, by reputation, prepared for some version of it. Attention to detail, sir. The ability to find the pattern in what looks like noise. And the judgment to know when a piece of information is actionable versus merely interesting. Reeves leaned back in his chair, and a faint, almost amused smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. Textbook. Good answer. Wrong answer, though, at least for me. He rose, unfolding himself from the chair with the unhurried economy of a much younger man, and walked to the window overlooking the Potomac, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. You want to know what I think separates the good from the great? Understanding that in this business, everyone is testing everyone, all the time. Every conversation, every gesture, every offhand comment, every cup of coffee, every supposedly casual remark in an elevator. It's all a probe, Captain, if you know how to look for it. He turned back to face her, and something in his expression shifted, sharpened, the affable older officer suddenly replaced by something colder and more deliberate. You young officers today, he went on, his voice taking on a faint, almost mocking edge. You come out of your training pipelines thinking you've seen it all. The simulators, the case studies, the mock interrogations, you think that's tradecraft. But real tradecraft, the kind that actually matters when the lights go out and the radios go quiet, that's not something you learn in a classroom. That's something you learn in places most people will spend their entire careers pretending don't exist. Lauren felt the temperature of the room change, the way a room changes when a storm is about to break even though the windows are shut tight. This was no longer a courtesy interview ahead of a promotion board. This was the test General Reeves was famous for, the one whispered about in officers' clubs from Fort Bragg to Seoul, and she had walked into it completely blind, with no idea what shape it would take. She said nothing. In places she could not name, to people whose faces she had been ordered to forget, she had learned that silence was very often the strongest possible answer. Reeves studied her for a long moment, his head tilted slightly, and then reached for the coffee mug on his desk. As he did, almost as an afterthought, he made a small, seemingly careless gesture with his free hand, 3 fingers extended, thumb tucked against his palm, a slight rotating motion at the wrist, the whole thing lasting perhaps half a second. To anyone not looking for it, the gesture would have meant nothing at all. It would have registered, if it registered at all, as an old man absently scratching at an old habit. Lauren's body responded before her conscious mind had even finished processing what she'd seen. Her hand moved on its own, an automatic, deeply trained, 4 years buried response, mirroring the gesture back to him exactly. A confirmation signal. Acknowledged. Clear to proceed. It was a hand signal restricted to the personnel of a single, highly compartmented maritime special operations unit. A signal that required a clearance level 2 full tiers above anything that existed in Captain Lauren Mitchell's official Army personnel file. General Harlan Reeves's coffee mug stopped, frozen, halfway to his mouth. The color drained out of his face in a way that Lauren had never seen happen to anyone before, certainly not to a 3-star general in his own office. His weathered features went genuinely ashen, his mouth opening slightly with no sound coming out. For a man who had walked through artillery barges in the deserts of Iraq and commanded troops in some of the most dangerous corners of the world, he looked, in that moment, utterly, completely stunned. Captain Mitchell, he said finally, and his voice had dropped to something just above a whisper. How in God's name do you know that signal? The silence that followed felt almost physical. A held breath stretched taut across the room, waiting to snap. Lauren watched the color slowly creep back into the general's face, but his eyes never left her, and there was something in the way he was looking at her now that reminded her of a man examining an unexploded device left in the middle of a street. He set the mug down on the desk with exaggerated care, and his hand drifted toward the secure telephone at his elbow. I am going to ask you again, Captain, and I want you to think very, very carefully before you answer. All trace of the dry, mocking tone was gone now, replaced by something flat and official and cold. How does an Army intelligence captain, a captain with an Afghanistan deployment and an 8-month classified gap in her file, come to know a recognition signal restricted to the personnel of a single Tier 1 Naval Special Warfare Unit? General I. Reeves cut her off with a sharp gesture and picked up the phone, dialing a 3-digit extension from memory. "This is Reeves. I need a security detail to my office, immediately. Full lockdown protocol. And get me Colonel Brooks from CI. Tell her to drop whatever she's doing." He set the receiver down and turned back to Lauren, his expression unreadable, carved from the same stone as the building around them. "Captain Mitchell, you are not to leave this room, and you are not to speak to anyone until this matter has been resolved. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Lauren said quietly. Somewhere behind her sternum, a fear she had thought buried for good, for years deep, began clawing its way back toward the surface. For the next 7 hours, Lauren sat in a windowless conference room 3 floors below ground level, while a rotating procession of counterintelligence officers took turns dismantling her life, one question at a time, with the patient thoroughness of people who had done this many times before and intended to do it as many times as it took. They went through everything. Her childhood in a small town outside Pensacola. Her finances, down to a forgotten library find from her sophomore year at Annapolis. Her medical records. Her training pipeline, course by course, instructor by instructor. Every base she had ever set foot on. Every officer she had ever served under. Every name in the contacts list of a phone she had surrendered at the door. "Let's go through the deployment gap again," said Major Daniel Pierce, the 4th interrogator to take a seat across from her, sliding a thick folder onto the table with a thud that seemed designed to be heard. "Afghanistan, 2021 to 2022. And then, nothing. 8 months. Your file says, and I'm quoting, classified joint assignment, location withheld. What, exactly, were you doing during those 8 months, Captain?" Lauren had answered some version of this question 6 times already, in 6 slightly different rooms, to 6 slightly different officers, each of them circling the same hole in her file from a different angle. "I was attached to a joint intelligence support element. The mission parameters and the location of that assignment are above my current clearance to discuss, sir." "Convenient," Pierce said, not bothering to hide the sarcasm in his voice. "A classified assignment you can't talk about, that just happens to line up perfectly with you learning a hand signal from a unit that officially doesn't exist outside of maybe a dozen compartments in this entire building." The door opened, and a woman in her late 40s walked in carrying a fresh folder and 2 cups of coffee. She set 1 cup down in front of Lauren without comment, took the seat across from her, and dismissed Major Pierce with a single glance that sent him out of the room without a word. Colonel Renee Brooks opened her folder slowly. "Captain, we've been at this for hours, and your story hasn't changed once. Not a detail, not a word. That's either remarkable discipline, or it's very, very good training." She slid a printed page across the table. "Here's what's interesting, though. We contacted every joint intelligence support element that was operational during your supposed assignment window. Every single one. None of them, not one, has any record of a Captain Lauren Mitchell ever being attached to their unit." Lauren kept her face carefully still, the way she had been trained to. "They're trying to break me through repetition," she thought. Ask the same question 50 different ways until exhaustion makes someone slip and say the one thing they were never supposed to say. "Let's try something different," Brooks said, leaning back in her chair with the unhurried air of someone settling in for a much longer conversation. "I'm going to be direct with you, Captain. We know you're hiding something. The only question that actually matters to me is why. Are you hiding it because you're protecting something you were lawfully ordered to protect, or because you're protecting yourself?" Lauren looked up at the fluorescent panel humming overhead and did the math she had hoped, every single day for the last 4 years, that she would never have to do. The oath she had sworn in a small, windowless room with no recording devices had been absolute, word for word, drilled into her until she could recite it in her sleep. "You will never confirm, deny, or discuss the existence of this program, under any circumstance, to any person, regardless of rank or clearance, without explicit authorization from your handler." But sitting in an underground interrogation room, after 7 hours, being asked, not in words, but in every single question, whether she was a traitor, she wondered, for the first time, whether that oath was worth what it might end up costing her. If, hypothetically, Lauren said slowly, choosing each word the way she might defuse something, an officer happened to know something that fell under a compartment above the clearance of everyone currently in this building, What would the correct procedure be for addressing that situation? Colonel Brooks went very still. For the first time in 7 hours, she didn't have an immediate answer. She left the room without another word, and Lauren sat alone for nearly 40 minutes, staring at the gray cinderblock wall, replaying the last 7 hours in her mind, searching for the moment. There had to be a moment where she had said too much, where some small slip had set all of this in motion. When the door finally opened again, it wasn't Brooks, and it wasn't Pierce. A tall man in navy dress uniform stepped into the room, and Lauren registered, with a small jolt that ran through her entire body, that the single star on his shoulder boards hadn't been there the last time she'd seen him. He was older than she remembered, more gray at the temples, deeper lines around the eyes, but the eyes themselves were exactly the same. Sharp, patient. The eyes of a man who had once sat across a different table from her, in a country whose name she had been ordered, formally and in writing, never to say aloud again. "Leave us," the man said to the 2 guards by the door, and there was just enough weight behind the words that they complied without hesitation, the door clicking shut behind them. He crossed to the small recording unit mounted in the corner of the ceiling and switched it off with a single decisive flick of his finger. Then, from an inside pocket of his jacket, he produced a small black device, thumbed a switch on its side, and set it on the table between them. It emitted a faint, almost subliminal electronic hum. "Signal jammer," he said, almost conversationally, as though commenting on the weather, just in case anyone in this building got curious about what's about to be said in this room. He turned and looked at Lauren, really looked at her, in a way no one else had all day, and something in his expression, something hard and official, softened all at once. "Captain Lauren Mitchell," he said. "Or should I say, Corpsman Riley Voss, formerly of Task Unit Nightingale." Something broke loose in Lauren's chest. 4 years of held breath finally escaping all at once. Tears she had refused to allow herself during 7 hours of interrogation rose without her permission, blurring the edges of the room. "Admiral Diaz," she whispered. "I wasn't sure you'd even remember me." "Remember you?" Diaz pulled out the chair across from her and lowered himself into it heavily, and the short laugh that escaped him had no humor in it at all. "Captain, what happened in that compound is burned into my memory like a brand. I think about it more than I think about almost anything else from my entire career. The question I want answered, the only question I actually care about right now, is how the hell a covert operative I personally signed off the books 4 years ago ends up sitting in a Pentagon interrogation room because she flashed a recognition signal at a 3-star general." Lauren explained everything. The meeting, General Reeves's small, almost careless gesture, her own automatic, unthinking response, and the 7 hours that had followed it. As she spoke, Diaz's expression darkened by degrees, his jaw tightening with something that looked very much like controlled fury. "Those people nearly blew open an operation 4 years in the making," he muttered when she finished, almost to himself. He studied her face for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "Lauren, I need to know. Have you told anyone in this building anything about Yemen?" "Anything at all?" "Nothing, sir. Operational security has been maintained exactly as briefed the entire time. 7 hours, and I gave them nothing." Diaz let out a long, slow breath, and something in his shoulders eased, the tension draining out of him like water finding a drain. "Good, because what I'm about to tell this room cannot leave it. And after tonight, it's entirely possible that none of us will ever be permitted to speak of it again by anyone for as long as we live. Master Chief Daryl Cole told me you were the fastest study he'd ever trained," Diaz said, and his voice settled into the slow, steady cadence of a man reciting something he had read so many times he no longer needed the page in front of him. "Within a week, you were operating inside that network like you'd been doing it for years. He didn't trust easily. He trusted you within 72 hours. Lauren smiled despite everything, remembering Cole, a gruff, sun-weathered veteran from somewhere outside Lubbock who had spent the first 3 days of training refusing to call her anything but the package, like she was a piece of cargo to be delivered and forgotten. By the end of the mission, he had been calling her Doc and arguing, loudly and not entirely jokingly, with anyone who suggested she should stay behind during a hot extraction. The insertion went clean, Diaz continued. You made contact with the network inside 48 hours. gained their confidence faster than anyone in the planning cell thought was possible, and started feeding us actionable intelligence on 3 separate cells that were planning attacks against American assets in the region. For 3 weeks, it worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. Better, even. Lauren's smile faded. She remembered, with perfect clarity, exactly when it had stopped working. The gray morning she had arrived at the safe house outside the port city to find it empty, furniture overturned, a single dark stain spreading across the concrete floor, and a message scrawled in hurried Arabic on the wall behind it. The Americans know. The cell had been feeding us false information almost from the start, Diaz said quietly, all the warmth gone from his voice now. They'd identified you almost immediately. We still don't fully know how, and they'd been using your reports, feeding back through you, to map our safe houses, our movement patterns, our extraction routes, our timing. When they finally made their move, they hit 4 locations simultaneously. Coordinated, professional, exactly timed to a window when our quick reaction assets were spread thin across the region. Lauren closed her eyes. She could still hear it, for years later, as clearly as if it were happening in the next room. Cole's voice over the radio, flat and controlled even as automatic weapons fire hammered in the background, calmly reporting that his 4-man element was pinned down inside a collapsing building, surrounded on 3 sides, with the extraction helicopter already down somewhere over the harbor and the quick reaction force still 2 hours out by the fastest possible route. That's the moment you made the call that saved 8 American lives, Diaz said, his voice dropping almost to nothing. You had a clean exfil route, Lauren. A genuinely clean one. Nobody, not me, not anyone in that planning cell, would ever have blamed you for taking it. Your cover was still intact. You could have walked away that night and disappeared, and not one person outside this room would ever have known what really happened. Instead, you blew 4 years of deep cover in about 90 seconds, walked back into a building that was actively under fire, and personally coordinated the extraction of Cole's entire team until the quick reaction force arrived. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet case, setting it down on the table between them without any ceremony at all, as though it were the most ordinary object in the world. The president signed off on this 11 months ago, Diaz said. We've been waiting for an opportunity to present it without compromising the program any further than absolutely necessary. I suppose, he added, with the faintest, driest trace of a smile. General Reeves just created that opportunity for us. Completely by accident. An hour later, the conference room was full. General Harlan Reeves stood at the head of the table, flanked by Colonel Brooks, Major Pierce, and 3 officers Lauren had never seen before, all of them now looking at her with an expression she hadn't encountered from anyone in this building all day. Captain Mitchell, Reeves said, and for the first time since she had walked into his office that morning, his voice carried no edge at all, no test hidden underneath it. I owe you an apology, and as much of an explanation as I'm permitted to give. My interview yesterday was designed to test how an officer responds under sudden, unexpected pressure. I have run that same test, in one form or another, on over 200 officers across my career. He paused, and for a moment something almost like discomfort crossed his weathered face. I have never, not once, in over 30 years, had it accidentally uncover a covert operative who single-handedly saved an entire special operations element in a deniable theater of operations, and then sat through 7 hours of hostile interrogation by her own government without revealing a single detail of that operation. Not one word, Captain. Not one. Thank you, sir, Lauren said. Her voice was steady, though she could feel the tears threatening again. Not fear this time, and not exhaustion, but something closer to relief, the kind that arrives all at once after holding something for far too long. Colonel Brooks stepped forward and extended her hand, and her expression was entirely different from the one she had worn for the previous 7 hours. Captain, I've spent 18 years in counterintelligence, Brooks said. I have interrogated people I genuinely believed were trying to destroy this country, and I have never seen operational security held under that kind of pressure. Not once. What you did in that room today, that was extraordinary. That evening, Lauren Mitchell walked out of the Pentagon's river entrance into the long gold light of a Washington sunset, a small velvet case in her jacket pocket and a weight on her shoulders that felt, for the first time in 4 years, like it actually belonged to her. She was no longer simply Captain Lauren Mitchell, Army intelligence officer with an unexplained 8-month gap in her service record. The gap that had followed her like a shadow through every security review, every promotion board, every quiet conversation that suddenly, awkwardly, changed subject the moment someone noticed the blank space in her file. She was Nightingale, the operative who had walked back into a burning building when every instinct she had screamed at her to run, and who had carried that secret, completely alone, for 4 years, without a single crack ever showing. The Potomac caught the last orange light of the day as Lauren crossed the parking lot toward her car, and for the first time since the heavy door of General Reeves's office had closed behind her that morning, she let herself breathe, slowly and deliberately, all the way out. Tomorrow there would be new assignments, new compartments, new secrets to carry, new oaths to swear in small windowless rooms with no recording devices. But tonight, for the first time in 4 years, she did not have to carry this one alone. Tonight, she could finally, quietly, be proud of who she really was.